It was just the most massive thing I've ever seen. To tell you the honest truth, I thought, well, we're the only ones left on this planet. Something's happened. It missed something here.
The fear that went in me when I seen it was just like the feeling. I'd say it was fear, but I've never felt that feeling before in my entire life.
It's a weird feeling, like you can't explain it when you don't know. You feel like you're being followed, but you don't know what it is.
We had two to our right, another one in front of us, another one to the left, and another one just across the road, shaking the daylights out of the tree. All we get was a big red eye.
I remember waking up and looking at the end of the bed, and there was a figure there, almost insect-like, and then I blacked out.
Welcome to the show, everyone. My name is Cade Moyer, and you are listening to the Believe Paranormal and UFO podcast. If you have had an encounter and would like to share it, please get in touch with me. My email address is believepod@gmail.com. If you enjoy the podcast, be sure to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen, and head on over to our website, believepod.com, and consider becoming a member to get bonus episodes and video content. Tonight I'm joined by MG Stevens, and she is the author of a book and also does the Boogeyman Chronicles, which to me, I think that's the coolest name for a podcast of all time. So MG, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's really cool to have you on. Your email hooked me. It was incredible. So you've had you've had quite an amazing life, and I just had to get you on the podcast because there's a couple of really interesting points to, I guess, your story. But let's start where it all began for you, because I really don't want to take the shine off it, because I think it is some valuable discussion to have later on. But where did your fascination with the weird and the wonderful kind of start?
Oh, Lord. I was born into it. I grew up in the South in America, and I am a neurodivergent, which means I am autistic and I have ADHD and dyspraxia. And interestingly, in my research, not all, but a lot of neurodivergent people are very highly sensitive to the paranormal. Whether it be, we're psychic, for lack of a better word, or sensitive or intuitive, or we just have very interesting paranormal encounters. I was talking to Kathleen Martin. I had her on my own podcast, and she was running off a bunch of facts and figures about UFO encounters. So many percentage of, males or this race or this blah, 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 this, have UFO encounters. And I said, let me ask you something. How about neurodivergent people? How many neurodivergent people in your studies? Because she's a researcher and she's an amazing researcher. And I said, how many people who are neurodivergent have had UFO encounters according to, what is the percentage in your research? And she said, oh, it's a good 86%. So there's something with neurodivergent folks like me that tend to be more sensitive to the paranormal. And like I said, not all of us, but a lot of us. And so it started very, very early with me. And my mother is also neurodivergent. She's also autistic with ADHD. And she had a whole lifetime of encounters as well. And I highlight some of that in my book. And for me, it started when I was a baby. I don't know exactly how old I was, but I was old enough to stand up in the crib. So I was, one night, I'm in the half light of my room, and I'm standing there in the, with my, I'm standing up in the crib, and I'm startled by something. And I happen to look up, and I see something floating above me, but yet I am the thing floating, because I could actually see me and the whole scene below me. So for some reason, I split into two, and I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dead. I don't know how I split, but I split into two, and I was able to look above me and see me, but I was able to look down and see me in the crib. So this was the first time that I can ever remember something like this happening. And about a year or so later, it happened again. It was Easter, and I remember being in my little purple Easter dress on my little tricycle, and I was real cranky. I probably needed a good nap, and my mom and my sibling, they were trying to get me to, like, hunt for eggs, and I just was crying and nasty, and probably just needed a really good nap. I was probably really tired. Anyway, I remember again being on my little tricycle in the front yard and looking up at something and being startled and pointing at it. And then yet I was the thing looking down at the whole scene. So this was the only time that I remember this. These two times were the only times that this ever happened. And it was quite terrifying. So I don't really know what this was about. I still to this day, I talked to Paul Eno, who is a paranormal pioneer. He's seen it all. He's worked with the Warrens and whatnot. And I talked to him. I said, what the heck was that? And he said, well, I don't really know. He said, it could be that in the multiverse, you have a shifting identity point, and your person split into two, and that's all he pretty much gave me. And I'm like, okay, that's something. It's something. I don't really know what it is, but it's something. So anyway,
that kind of sounds like you're astral projecting.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know enough about that to really say that it was that or wasn't that. I don't know. I just know that it happened, and I was just a baby. I wasn't even trying,
How old were you, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was old enough to stand up in a crib, so I guess maybe 2.
Yeah, you probably
maybe, or
about
younger.
2 or 3 if you're standing. That's
You have kids, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah. One of them is sleeping like in the room next to the studio. So if you hear her crying, that will be maybe her astral projecting.
But I mean, your kid. I mean, how old are they? I don't know. I don't have children, so I don't know how old when they can stand up in the crib and hold on to the side. But that's how old I was.
Yeah, it'll be between that 1 and 2 years old kind of age, and I think it's amazing that you have the ability to kind of recollect that whole, I guess, situation that happened. Because I tell you what, I could barely remember what happened to me a year ago, let alone what happened when I was 2 or even younger than that. So that's an amazing recollection that you have there. But one question I do have for you, and this might be impossible to answer considering the age that you were, but it almost sounds like you were doing this while still having a conscious understanding of what you were needing to do in the current real world.
Yeah, I mean, I the reason I remember it because it was so weird and it burned itself. These two experiences burned themselves into my memory. I did kind of, through the years, I did kind of sort of, forget it, and it wasn't as strong of a memory. And then when I started to write the book, I started to think back to that time. And, when you sit down and you really start to think, you have a good think about it. It was like, oh my gosh, that really happened, and I remember the second thing I said, that happened again too. Oh my gosh. Yes. And it was so weird how, I had a vague, I remembered it, but it was just kind of like, and then when I started to really remember, I started to remember all the things that I saw in the room. And it was interesting because I was just a baby, and why would I know? I had a diaper pail, diaper bin that you put the dirty diapers in, and I remember exactly what that looked like. I remember what we had garish, hideous looking 70s wallpaper, and orange carpeting, shag carpeting, and all that stuff. And I remember I told my mom what my nursery looked like when I got a little bit older and I could talk to her. I said, Mom, did my nursery look like this? And did my diaper pail look like this? And she said, yeah, how did you know that? You were just a baby. And I said, I saw it. I saw it one night. I split. I kind of, in my own the words of a little kid, I was like, I saw it. I had some sort of weird experience and where I could see everything in my room. So she was just shocked. She was just like, oh my God. And I remembered the Easter event. I remembered, different things about that, and she couldn't believe that either. She was like, oh my God, you were so young, how do you remember that? I said, Mom, I saw it from a completely different angle, so I don't know, it was so weird.
Yeah, it's mind-bending, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of disturbing because it's like I'm kind of half fascinated and half terrified, and I'm like, is this going to happen again? And I've had another weird experience that I didn't put in the book, but I had some really bad neighbors a few years back, and we were dealing with that. They were just narcissistic, terrible neighbors. And I remember I went to bed one night just kind of like thinking about them and how terrible they were. And I had a horrible dream about one of them. And then the next day, one of them said, you were over here last night. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, you were over here last night. I know you were. I felt your presence. And I was just like, whoa, okay. So that was kind of a weird thing where, I literally had a dream about them yelling at me. And yet they told me the next day that my spirit or whatever was over there. So. Wow.
That is, those are neighbors from hell.
Yeah. Tell me they were the worst, and they've moved out, thank God, since then. But they literally picked, like, they felt my presence, and I guess it's at some point, because they say that when you go to sleep you do astral project and you don't really realize it. So I think we're all doing that. Maybe, I don't know.
I like to think so. I like to think I have some really cool abilities in my dream state that I don't have here, because I live a pretty vanilla life, to be honest. And tell you what, my dreams go crazy.
Yeah, I have crazy dreams too. Sometimes people say, oh, I've got such a vanilla life. Be thankful for that vanilla life, because I have had anything but. And you're going to want to have that vanilla life sometimes, because during my years, these last 45 years, I have wished for a vanilla life.
Well, let's dive into your very interesting life, because you say that you've had a UFO encounter, and I love UFO stories. So can you tell me about yours? And now a quick word from our sponsor. Also, are you wanting more content? Why not become a Believe Plus member? You'll get access to exclusive podcasts and episodes that aren't available to the public. Not only that, you'll also get our regular feed without any ads. Head to believepod.com/plus to sign up today for just $5 a month.
Yeah, my mom actually had one. She was actually abducted in the 60s, and then later in the 90s, I had one. I was wide awake though. And I was 1995, about 18 years old. And I remember I was, my mother and our flatmate at that time, they were going to this home church, and I hated this thing. Oh my God, I hated this. I wasn't a religious person, didn't like church, wasn't really into it. And, I was just kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired. And my mom was like, okay, cool. Don't worry about it. So she's like, well, stay out here, if you want, or come inside. I don't care. But she said, if things get weird, I remember her telling me, if you get weirded out, come in, because I was outside. And I said, yeah, whatever. So I'm sitting outside. It's nighttime. It's dark, but there's like, it's a neighborhood. So there's like little lampposts everywhere, but they don't really help you to see anything. They're just kind of like blinding you. So they're not really helping very much. But I'm standing at the bank of this pond. And if you're in the South, in America, you'll know that when those toads start croaking, you can't hear anything else. It's just deafening. And plus there's other ambient sounds, you'll hear dogs barking and planes and people talking and cars and TVs and blah, blah, blah. So I remember being, standing out there at this pond thinking, what am I going to do for the next 4 hours? I was just like, oh, geez. And I remember standing there trying to distract myself. And, I remember all of a sudden looking up at the sky because I started to feel kind of weird. I started to feel kind of anxious. But I had anxiety attacks at that time, so I was like, okay, maybe I'm just making myself anxious. And I remember looking up at the sky, and the sky looked funny. It looked where I lived in the South, there was always the moon was always out, or there's always stars, or there was always clouds, something. But the sky looked like felt. It looked like an inky black. It looked weird. And I'm just like, I couldn't see anything. There was nothing. And I thought, that sky looks really weird. As soon as I noticed this, I got the weirdest, creepiest, most terrifying feeling where it would just, I'm not kidding you, it felt like danger, terror, run, oh my God, something's after you. And I remember I kept getting a rush of this, and I went, oh my God, oh my God. And I looked around thinking there was going to be like I was picking up on a person or something going to jump out at me. And I felt like I was being stalked. And I was like, what the heck is that? And I would calm myself down from that feeling. And I was like, okay, calm down. And I noticed that all of a sudden there was no sound. The toads stopped croaking. No crickets. No cars sound. No people. No nothing. It was like someone muted the planet. I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? I mean, I never had this experience before. Everything was silent. If I felt like I talked to Terry Lovelace. He was my first guest on my podcast, and he said, it sounds kind of like like you're in a sound booth, because it's more than quiet. And I said, yes, that's it. And I remember I was just like getting another rush of that terror feeling, and I'm looking all around going, what the hell is going on here? And all of a sudden, over to my right, quite low in the sky, I see this strip of clouds that I didn't see before. I'm like, what is that? And all of a sudden I see these lights that look kind of like spotlights. There's 3 of them. And they're moving in this very, very intricate, silent, no sound formation. It was like a figure 8 formation, but there was 3 of them. So it was like, but it was flawless. There was no way that this could be drones or planes or helicopters, because I started debunking it like the minute it happened. I'm looking at it going, what the hell? And whenever we would see in my crappy little southern town, my mom, whenever we would see spotlights, my mom would always say, oh, a car dealership's having a sale. So I was like, oh, car dealership's having a sale. And I dismissed it. And I looked, because I got another one of those terrifying rushed, stalk feelings. And I turned to my head, and all of a sudden I heard in my head, not my voice, not my thought. I heard in my head, look at the lights again. Like it wanted to be noticed. And my head swiveled really slowly. And I looked at those lights, and I could see that there was no sound, that the beams weren't like when you see spotlights from the ground, the beams hit the clouds and you could see the reflection. Well, these lights were inside the clouds. There was no beams. And I'm debunking this, in my head, like a split seconds, just like, oh my God, so it's not this, it's not that. And I'm looking at these lights, and these things are so bright, and they're silent, and they're moving in such a fluid fashion. There's no way this could be anything else. And I was just freaking out, and I'm standing there looking at this thing, and I, for some reason, had a direct connection with this thing, whatever it was, thing, I don't know. And I remember looking up at this thing and going, what is that? And I remember it literally said, because I felt it like deep in my chest, this thing is not supposed to be there, and it knows it. It's like, when someone's violating your space and they know it. It was that kind of feeling. It was like, this thing is not supposed to be here. It knows it's not supposed to be here. And it was kind of thumbing its nose at me. It was almost like a taunty thing, because next thing I heard in my head, again, not my thought, we're not supposed to be here, and we know you know it. And I went, what? And as soon as I went like, what the hell? It stopped the weird sort of intricate figure 8 formation. It stopped right where it was. And then it just started going around in a circle. Like, it just was like, na 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 na, what are you going to do? And I was looking at this light going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm seeing this. And I got mad because it was almost like it was taunting me. It was like a kid on a playground. It was taunting me. And I thought, oh, no, you don't. And I guess I'm Southern and feisty enough to where I was like, oh, no, you don't. And, I'm not, like I said, I wasn't a religious person, but, and the world that I grew up in, if you want something bad to go away, you say, in the name of Jesus, get out of here, And so that's what I did. And the angrier I screamed at this thing, not kidding you. And the angrier I got, the faster these lights were spinning in a perfect circle. They just started spinning. And I was like, you're not supposed to be here, and you better get out of here right now. Jesus' name, blah, 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 blah. And I started screaming at this thing. And the angrier I got, the louder it got, the faster it got. Like, it was connected to my emotions. It was so weird. And this thing went and flew away off to the right out of these clouds, that if I had blinked, if my eyes weren't peeled, I would have missed it. It was that fast. And so I ran my butt back into that house, and I was like, oh my God. And so I ran in, and I found the sort of like most furthest point away from everybody, which was like this stairwell. And my mother saw me, and she, my mom knew. I guess I looked white as a sheet maybe, but I ran in and I sat down on these steps, and I'm just hugging my knees going, what the hell did I just see? And my mom saw me, comes around the corner, and she said, what's wrong with you? And I said, Mom, I saw something. And she said, okay. She said, look, don't say anything here. She said, we'll talk about it when we get home. So after the meeting, we went home, and we only had like 5 minutes to go because we just lived across the street, so we didn't have far to go. And we got home, and my mom was like, what the hell happened to you? And I said, Mom, I saw something. And because she had her own encounter, she said, okay, I believe you. And our flatmate at that time, he believed in UFOs. So he was like, wow, oh my God, this is insane. I said, yeah, I know. And so my mom told me, she said, look, the kind of religious people we hang around, don't be telling nobody this, because they're not going to understand. And they're going to think you brought the devil or something crazy. So don't say nothing to them. And I said, okay. And I didn't have no one to tell anyways. I was kind of, I lived kind of a solitary life, in a way. So I didn't really, have a lot of friends at that time. And I didn't really say anything to anybody. I didn't want to tell anyway. So I never said anything. I just kept it to myself. And so for that week, I was terrified to go outside. And the next Saturday was the next meeting. And I wasn't about to stay outside. I'm like, I don't want to go to this meeting, but I don't want to stay out here either. So I went to the meeting, and I sat there and I sulked, and I didn't want to be there. But interesting, in walked the parents of my ex-boyfriend, who I just did not want to look at. I didn't want to deal with them. They were mad at me because I dumped their stupid kid, and they, so they weren't too happy with me, and I wasn't happy with them because, they didn't quite tell me that he was not mentally well. So yeah, there was a thing there. So anyway, I didn't want to see them. I was like, oh crap. So I looked the other way, but I couldn't help but notice that they acted like a couple of scared monkeys clinging to each other. They had a look of complete terror on their face, and they were very, very quiet, which is unlike them. Normally, the husband was really loud. He was like, hey, everybody, blah, 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 And we were like, okay, yeah, hi. You know, he was always so loud and obnoxious and just kind of like had to be the center of attention. They both walked in like they had seen a ghost. And everybody noticed it. This was a complete departure of how they normally were. And they sat down on this little love seat sofa thing. And I couldn't help but I couldn't stop looking at them. What the hell is going on with these people? And everyone else noticed it too. It was crazy. So we're all looking at them, and literally for 4 hours, the whole meeting, they didn't say anything. They just sat there and just clung to each other. And finally, people just couldn't take it anymore. So they were just like, they sent someone over. They said, hey, are you guys okay? Do you need prayer or something? And they looked up at everyone with the most terrified look on their faces. And they were like, we saw something. We saw something. We saw something. We saw something. And they were stuck in this like trauma loop, and they couldn't stop saying it. They were like, we saw something. We saw something. We saw something. And finally, someone managed to pull out of them that what they saw was the week previous, when the night that I had seen the lights and cussed them out, they drove home, and they said they had this little tiny pickup truck, you know, and they said that as they were driving home, and this is what I don't understand, because they lived in a very heavily residential populated area. This was suburban, you know, area. This was not out in the sticks, you know, not out in the boonies. And they said that they were driving home, and they said something very heavy and metallic landed on the roof of their truck with a big clang. And they said it sounded like a heavy metal trash can that landed on the roof of their truck. They can't see it, but they felt it and they heard it. And they said for the next half mile or so, this thing tried to pick up their truck and kidnap them. And they said the front of their truck was being lifted up, and, you know, and I know these people, they were extremely religious. They did not believe in UFOs, none of that stuff. And they literally were praying like I was, you know, like I did. They prayed and prayed and prayed. Finally, this thing unlatched them and flew off, I guess, left them. But this was enough of an encounter to absolutely terrify these two people. And I lost contact after that with them. I was kind of glad. But they acted like their whole entire world was turned upside down.
Yeah. It's a real kind of paradigm breaking event, especially to those of particular faiths, and very, very heavily involved in those faiths, that anything kind of outside of that box is kind of sacrilegious. It completely breaks all the rules, and I guess it really does change everything that they believe in if they encounter something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I always give a side note that I knew these people well because I dated their stupid kid. And I remember I had been over to their house several times, and these people were so incredibly religious that they didn't let anything but the Bible in their house. You weren't allowed to bring a magazine. You weren't allowed to bring a newspaper. They had nothing but Christian programming on a TV. There was no news. There was no nothing. These people were hyper religious, you know, the Shiite Christians, you know, they were just absolutely religious. There was absolutely no talk of UFOs. All of that was of the devil. And so for them to have this very, very close encounter, what completely shook up everything that they had believed in. And that was the look on their face when I saw them, was that everything that they thought was, you know, true has now been thrown up to the wind, and they don't know what to believe. You know, that was the look of sheer terror on their face. They were like, what the hell? You know,
it's crazy, you know. And the thing with these types of encounters, I say this to a lot of people, because a lot of people just seem to think that UFO encounters and Yowie encounters, or where you're from, Sasquatch encounters, kind of happen to crazy people or, people on drugs or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a great example of, these types of encounters. They do not care who it happens to. There's
Mm-hmm.
no discrimination when it comes to a UFO encounter. It's if you're on the path for a UFO encounter, it's going to happen to you regardless whether you believe in them or not.
Oh yeah, I mean, this UFO encounter. I mean, I've heard a lot of UFO encounters. I talked to people with these encounters, but it almost had the feel that they were being naughty. It almost had the feel like, how when teenagers get to a certain age and they can take the car out and they start looking for trouble, and it kind of had that feeling like whatever these things were, they got the keys from their dad and they were like, hey, let's go look for some earthlings. And I swear to God, that's how it felt, because they were like, they literally came at us like with this like sort of newbie energy of like, hey, oh, look at me, And it was just like, it was like the funniest. I look back now, I mean, it was terrifying then, but I look back now and laugh, because it was like the energy of it was like, are you guys noobs? Like, well, really, like, how do you know? Like, they didn't even know what they were doing. That's what it felt like. It was really silly, and it was kind of, it's comical now that I can look back at it. Like, really, it had that feel of like kids, getting into trouble. And I always tell people, like, there's that viral video of that dumb guy dancing in front of the buffalo, and then the buffalo takes off after him and he starts running away. And that's kind of the feeling it was when they came at me. I was the buffalo, I guess. And so I started screaming, and they're like, oh, and they took off. And I swear they I don't know, they must have put me on some sort of intergalactic do not call list, because I've never had an encounter since.
Yeah, right.
So I must have scared them.
It is fascinating, because there's the whole phenomenon of the world kind of just going completely silent, which I hear a lot in UFO encounters. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's some type of kind of effect from these crafts. I don't know if it's the human body kind of just being so hyper focused on this incredibly weird thing that's going on in front of you that all your senses kind of just fall off everything else, or if there's something else to it. Like, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that is a one sort of main feature of a lot of many UFO encounters, is that weird sort of sensory deprivation, almost feeling where it feels like, your ears shut down, or like everything, like all the sound shuts down. And it's weird, because even you talk to Terry Lovelace and other folks, they'll tell you, they'll be outside and it's like the crickets stop chirping and the toads stop croaking and the flies stop buzzing and the everything stops. And I don't know if it's some sort of energy that these things project. Maybe it's enough to kind of disrupt some sort of some sort of resonance or something. I don't know. Maybe it's enough to just kind of like send, because I mean, I sense this thing, that those rushes, those terrifying feelings, that was the UFO, and I was feeling it, and I don't know why I was feeling it, but I sensed this thing coming, and it spotted me. I mean, this thing saw me, and it was like, oh, hey, here's an earthling, let's torture it. You know what I mean? And that this thing had me in its sights. And so, I don't know. I just feel like, there's something to the energy of these things, that you can sense them coming, and maybe other like bugs, animals can sense them coming as well, because I've heard of other people's encounters where they said their cat started to freak out, or their dog started to bark, right before the encounter. So who knows? Maybe animals can sense them.
Maybe. And I always have this weird thought when it comes to the whole no sound thing, because I'm sure you're well aware of who Bob Lazar is and things like that. Mm-hmm. But there's this kind of theory that they use gravity to kind of move themselves around. And I wonder if they are producing enough gravity to essentially stop time. So if you're stopping time, you're stopping all sound, you're stopping everything like that. And if you're caught within that little, let's say, bubble of gravity, you're feeling the effects from that ship. So maybe they're not actually stopping the sound, or there's no sensory deprivation. It's you're just caught in essentially the atmosphere conditions of that UFO, and potentially the rest of the world around you has just stopped, because when it comes to gravity, it goes very much hand in hand with time. And who knows, these things could just be stopping time for that tiny fraction that your involvement is there with them.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of encounters where people literally felt like time had stopped, like everything in their world, like they saw some bright lights. They went downstairs and their dog was at the front door, and like their dog was barking, and then it just stopped mid bark and just froze.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah, and cars on a highway, like literally everything just stopped, and then these people were abducted, and then they were set back down. So I definitely believe that there's some sort of manipulation of time.
I love I love every theory when it comes to UFOs, because I feel like there's not a right or a wrong one at the end of the day, and it's the most fun thing to speculate about, because I guess people in our positions, we get to talk to the most interesting people basically every day of our lives, who have had the most legitimately out of these world encounters. And it is just so great how close or how different they can be, because there's this saying, the more I know, or the more I learn, the less I know. And that happens to me every time I talk to someone on this podcast. Every episode, my mind is blown in one way or another.
Yeah, mine too. I've interviewed a handful of people, and every time, and even not interviewing, just talking to people, or even just listening, to your podcast. I learn something new each and every time, and learn that there's a lot of similarities with these UFO abductions and encounters. Like my mother's, she had a lot of similarities, but then there are times when you learn something new that not all of them are 100% alike,
Yeah, definitely. Well, Angie, you have been an incredibly interesting person, and I know we've really only scratched the surface for, I guess, all the weird stuff that's kind of gone on in your life. But luckily, like you said, you have kind of created a book about all of this. So before I kind of let you go, I want you to give yourself a really, really good plug and let people know where they can buy your book, where they can listen to your podcast, and kind of just learn a little bit more about Angie Stevens as a person.
Well, so I have my own podcast called the Boogeyman Chronicles, and I kind of had to put it on hold for a little bit because I had surgery and whatnot. I had to get better, recover and stuff like that. So my podcast is the Boogeyman Chronicles. It's on YouTube, and we've interviewed some really amazing people with lots of really great stories. And then, I started to realize that a lot of people out there, because I stayed so private all these years, nobody really knows my story. And no one knows really the 40 plus years of paranormal encounters that I've had. I mean, I've literally faced off with demons and ghosts and all kinds of stuff. And I've had a really weird out of body dream. It's just, it's ran the gamut. It's never really stopped. For 40 years, I've had nothing but experiences, and it wasn't a particular house. It wasn't a particular place. It was me, being neurodivergent. I think I just attracted these things, or I just happened to be, picking up on them. So I wrote a book called The Boogeyman Chronicles, because that was kind of the perfect name for it. To me, the boogeyman encapsulates like anything scary. So it could be UFOs, ghosts, shadow people, what have you. And I kind of had all of that in my life. I had an apartment in LA that was haunted, just all kinds of stuff. So the book can be found on Amazon. And if you just type in Boogeyman Chronicles, MG Stevens, and you can get the book there. I do recommend not reading it at night before you go to bed, because a lot of people told me like, oh, I thought I was going to, just sit back and read your book a little bit before I went to bed. And I ended up not being able to sleep. So read it during the day, I guess. But yeah, that's my my book and my podcast. So
MG, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know it was an absolute mammoth effort on your side of the world, because little peek behind the curtain, it was 3 a.m. when we started recording for you. So personally, thank you very much for making that much effort. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. I really love your podcast, and it's been an honor. And I can't believe a whole hour's gone by. It doesn't feel like it, but yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Believe Paranormal and UFO podcast. If you have had an encounter and you would like to share it, please get in touch with me. My email address is believepod@gmail.com. Finally, don't forget to follow us on all our social media outlets, and be sure to join our Discord server to talk to other listeners of the show. You'll find all these links in our show notes. Thank you.